champion on the board that really is there for us whenever we need somebody to call the governor or something. And so we're still trying to even foster that relationship with our own tribal government.
Do you guys have a subcommittee on your tribal council that is part of the transit, or do you have a board of people who are part of your transit program? Do you have an internal board for the transit program?
We do not. The only thing we have is our STF board, Special Transportation Fund board, and that's almost entirely staff within the transit program currently. And we don't have. There's been some conversations about with surrounding communities. Since we are providing rides throughout the entire region, it's not just the reservation we're providing rides to. We're actually the entire region. Is at some point in the future there may be kind of a citizens advisory council that would include people from all those communities or some of those communities. Maybe perhaps five board members or something like that, as an advisory committee to make sure they're really connecting with those communities. But as of right now, we don't have anything at all. So Jenny, did you want to talk about funding inequalities? I think there was
that was a huge issue that came up with the formula funding and the changes that came about with MAP 21. And I believe there's going to be changes upcoming now with the new transportation bill. Has it been signed? Has it gone through all the process?
Gosh, I keep hearing like different parts that are being signed. I think that it's in conference right now, so that's been signed in both the House and the Senate, but now they're doing the conferencing. So there's still, this is when real horse trading happens.
Right. It was a huge hit for Big Woods Transit, which is my agency. We lost probably 2/3 of our funding when MAP 21 was signed in the formula funds. So that created quite a bit of hardship. Last year was a really tough year. I wonder if anybody else has had those difficulties. But of course, it's a shortage of money everywhere, I guess. And I would like to know some ideas about how other tribal transits are perhaps dealing with that. Some mitigation things that they've done to make sure that their transit survives. That would be really interesting to hear from the different tribal transit agencies.
So, JD, I think the kayak lost about 50% of its funding.
Over the last 2 cycles, we lost about 50% of our funding for the FDA grant. Right. And one of the limitations on that, there's tier 1, 2, and 3, and we qualify for tier 1 and 2, but we are about, I think, 9 people short, 9 people under the poverty level, less than 20 people under the poverty level within our jurisdiction to qualify for tier 3 funding. And that's one of the things that we've been really challenged with, is because since we are only allowed to count people within our jurisdiction for our tier 3 funding, that is only within the reservation boundaries. But 90% of our road miles are actually, and about 80% of our ridership is non-tribal and non-within the boundaries. And so we've always tried to make an argument that we're actually serving all these other people, and we're serving all these people of disadvantage, especially economic disadvantage, and that we are reaching quite a bit number of people that would push us over that number. But we get finger wagging from the agencies that we can only count everything within our jurisdiction.
Yeah, and we have the same problem with people living on tribal lands, and I think we'd have more band members living on tribal lands, except there's such a shortage of housing. So you have people living within the vicinity, and so my suggestion was that maybe we could use the numbers of people accessing the reservation clinics, because that's a much higher number, because those are band members that are living in the region, perhaps people that would even live on the reservation if there was adequate housing.
Right.
And that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, that's something I haven't thought about because our reservation, about half of our enrolled members live on reservation, and then probably another third live within 40 miles or within our service district for kayak public transit. So,
and you're providing services for them.
And yeah, we're providing services for them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But most governments, if a political jurisdiction doesn't include people, it's not people's political affiliation, it's just where they live. And so even though they're tribal members who live off reservation, that means in the eyes of our formulas, they're not within our jurisdiction or not under our jurisdiction, when in fact they are. So anyway, that's something I think, we're always looking at ways to try to capitalize on that or try to find, because the other thing too is there's been an argument that we should be able to count everybody within our service area, but I think that would also open that up to everybody else. And I think what would end up happening in rough numbers is, something that we've always been dealing with in tribal transit program is, slowly diluting those funds. And, if we change the rules to allow more people to access that Tier 3 funding or any of the other tiered funding, then I think we may just accidentally over-dilute ourselves that it's not even worth the effort to do it in the first place. I don't know. I mean, I think there's something that we need to have a conversation with about that. Because it's always been struggling. I was joking with some of the members at RTAP that they were starting the new transit programs and joking that they were diluting our funding. But of course, we want to support everybody to be able to get their transit systems up and running. But it's also like, literally in the back of my head, it is like I have an existing system, and if I know that our funding is getting diluted, then that means I have to plan for 2 or 3 years in the future, knowing that we're going to have less and less money because there's more tribes in the pool. So it's really hard to kind of balance that.
I guess I want to bring up the fact that, and this gets to the issue that I saw in the questions about having a tribal transit group. One of the things that happened is in this reauthorization or the transportation bill is, I think that there's $19 million worth of projects that FTA wasn't able to fund for tribal transit, and so then they increased the request for funds by $5 million. And I looked at a lot and I said, "Oh, really? That's amazing."
Yeah.
So it seems to me that FTA is not comfortable advocating for tribal transit, and that there has to be some way to have the tribes support the funding issue.
Especially with, because of course the tribal transits are also rural transits, possibly even more isolated and economically depressed areas, just not necessarily Bois Forte tribe, but northern Minnesota is a very economically depressed, kind of boom or bust economic situations here in northern Minnesota. So we're providing services for everyone.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Jerry. I wanted to jump in. JD, I know at the conference that you talked about some of the other funding sources that you had found kind of to pull in people within your service area. And maybe you could talk about that, but I also wanted to remind our participants that raising their hand on the control panel, I will unmute them and they can talk about any alternative sources that they might have found for funding.
All right. Well, we haven't done anything yet. So, like when I introduced myself, I said, we go to 2 states, 5 counties, and 14 communities, and we get money from Oregon and FTA, and the only other communities we get money from are 2 small communities that we actually have to go out of our way to go get, and then they also get money from the state as well to basically pay us through ODOT funds. And so the vast majority of our ridership, and then we also go through 2 MPOs, or go to 2 MPOs, and another area that is a pre-MPO. So there's a lot of transit funds that are out there, And one of the things, we're going to require people to pay, but the thing is, like, we're going to these communities, and all these communities are now realizing how important it is. Myself, I was just in the newspaper today about, there's been a whole series of articles in the last month here locally about transportation and transportation options and transit, and so I've been in the paper way too much in the last month and a half. But I think even in rural areas, people are becoming much more cognizant of what needs to happen in order economically, in order to keep people to be able to live in rural areas. And so basically what we're going to do is start going to those communities and start asking them for money, or some kind of other partnership. A lot of them do get various formula funds and various funds from states and local taxes, as well as from federal. And we have the ability, we have an existing system. Basically what we're hoping to do in the future is just expand our system into their areas and make them a full partner into the operation of a transit system. That's going to take a long time. It's almost like a rural regional transit authority that I'm kind of envisioning. How that really works out in the future, we have nothing on ink right now. So, but there is, a lot of growth potential by partnering with our neighbors. Because even right now, all the funds that are coming in, we get funds from the state. The city of Pendleton, which is only 5 miles away, they get almost the exact same amount of funds for their program in the same formula program, but they don't. But we end up overlapping each other quite a bit, and so we're trying to figure out how we can synergize that money and be able to make it go a lot further. But that requires us to partner. And then, of course, then that dredges up some of the long-standing issues between tribal communities. If it's just two rural communities partnering together, that, in my mind, sounds a little bit easier than a tribal community partnering with a rural town, mostly because of historical inequality and historical pains and other things like that have occurred. We still deal with that here quite a bit. A lot of especially the elders and the tribal members here on the reservation, still have a very deep distrust from people who live 5 miles down the road. And sometimes even that's reversed as well. And so how do we actually surmount that and let people know that this is actually good for everybody? The settlers aren't going away, and so how do we actually communicate and work with them to actually make it more everybody who is living here now. So I mean, it's a lot of work, and like I said, nothing at all is in ink and paper at all. These are all just conversations that are going on with people in the region.
And that's what's important, is to keep those conversations going.
Right.
Yeah, even if it's not accepted right away, if you just keep that relationship and that partnership going and have an ongoing conversation, I think those people will, come around.
Right, and I think, especially our leadership here as well as with the county and the neighboring communities, they're very much on board. Sometimes it's often just the grassroots that aren't. So I mean it requires leadership, basically, especially to do these large interagency and interjurisdictional agreements. But I think that's a direction we're going to go, because it's the only way we're going to be able to grow and make it more accessible for everybody. Is basically to partner with that's how transit works. These little communities, having one little bus running around, it's great for the people that live right there, but, there's only so many services you can provide in a small little community. They have to connect to those other communities, and so that's how we have to do is, get those agreements between everybody.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up, JD, is that most states receive their 5311 funding based on population. So right. If you are looking at expanding the area where you're providing service, and if you look at the area that the Umatilla provides service, you're not receiving funding for all of the population in that area.
Oh.
So there are opportunities, as you were saying, by partnering with those jurisdictions to increase your allocation. And I'm not right. sure how much that's true. And I know in other states they receive their funding that way, but it's a state discretion to decide how they're going to allocate that out and how they weight the formula. And at the conference we had a little bit of a conversation with Mary Ann Stock, the 5311 manager, and people in general use the population as a big piece of it, not just ridership, but population too.
Yeah. Right, and that's where most of our population is, for us anyway, is actually in those communities. The population of just our reservation is only 3,000, but then, our surrounding area, just, the surrounding towns, the three major towns we go to have a collective population of 150,000 people, somewhere in there, I guess, including Tri-Cities. So.
Well, Tri-Cities is over 250,000.
Yeah, so that goes up to 400,000 people. 400,000 people that we're actually connecting to. So anyway, we can go around and around on that, but I don't know if I see there's a couple questions up there. I don't know if there's any questions or comments.
JD, there's a question on how would that work for hello?
Yep, I'm here.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, I thought I got cut off. There's a question on how would that work for tribal transit collaborate with the rural county transit?
What I've found in rural areas is that so much of it is personal relationships. And so, here at the tribe, we have a very formal process on communicating with our jurisdictions, and, we go through communications office and we make sure everything's right. But then, my neighboring planners, we just go have lunch and just talk. And everything's off the record, and it's good to maintain those really deep, personal, one-on-one conversations, because there's the official stuff that invariably ends up in the papers, but then there's, that close relationship with those surrounding people on being able to speak honestly and openly with them about the future of your projects and programs. So, and I do try to maintain that as much as possible, and I think that's where it's actually coming from. Almost exactly the same question came up. The city of Pendleton is doing a special transportation program. I can't remember. It's some acronym. An update for their transportation systems plan, specifically on transit and pedestrian access. And so a community member did ask that, like, how would that actually work if we were to expand our transit system into a city transit system for the city of Pendleton? So currently we go through the town, but we don't really run all over the city. And so she asked how that would work. And that's when I said, even us as a tribal community, we have to be able to realize that our transit system might graduate from the tribal organization. And so that's kind of how I'm kind of viewing it, is that at some point our tribal transit, because we offer it to so many people, that it may float up and out of the tribal organization. And if that's to another transit board or regional transit board or something, I don't know, the tribe, if there's 5 seats on that board, then tribe might retain 2 of them because we put in the most money, the most time, and the most effort. That's something that it all needs to be hammered out in the future. And, that depends on, how that works with somebody else's organization. Without knowing any specifics on anybody's individual programs, but that's how we're seeing ours as a potentiality in the next 10 or 15 years. And so it would be tribal transit where we're still providing service to our customer for our tribal community, but then, we've just become so big that, it's, I think 80% of our ridership are non-tribal members now, because we go to so many places, and people are now relying on work and for access to, access to medical. So yeah, that's how we're kind of moving forward on that, but I don't know if that really works everywhere. Is there another question, or I didn't know if there was a follow-up?
That's the only one right now.
Okay. Well, do we want to move on to the need for national tribal transit rodeos? Did you want to talk about that, Jenny, at all, or? I hate feeling like sometimes I'll dominate a conversation. I just talk for hours, so I want to make sure everybody else gets a chance to talk too.
I think Jennie is offline. I got a message. They just lost power.
Oh, wow.
Minnesota.
Oh my gosh, there must be a storm. So,
but there is another question.
Okay.
It says, I know that our transit is doing good at this time, but some county areas are having a hard time serving some areas that we also provide in which we have tribal members that live off reservation but serve that only to allow to serve parts of that city.
I'm going to unmute the Jennie Rowland in attendees. I think that's another person logged in off the same link, in case they want to be able to respond to.
Okay. I'm reading that.
Hello.
So,
yeah,
hello?
Reservation. So, it sounds like that is a question about when the jurisdiction one of the jurisdictions that is outside the reservation doesn't allow access to the full community outside the reservation, even though they have requests from tribal members that live in that area to serve them. And is that what that says?
So what I'm wondering is like if it's so we have a system where one of our routes actually goes through another community that does get their own funding. And so there is, I mean, we're friendly, we know each other really well, and, you know, we have lunch together, but there is a little bit of tension because from Pendleton to Walla Walla, if you ever look at a map, you know, it's about 45 miles, but then the last 12 miles, there's also another route that goes from another little town called Milton Freewater also to Walla Walla along the same route and with the same stops. And so we kind of duplicate their service, and so there's a little bit of a tension between us, like who actually has primacy on that, because obviously the funding they don't want people to be duplicating service. You know, and so we just did that, just interpersonally, we just coordinated those stops to make sure that we weren't always stopping there at the same time. Because another issue with that is that transit service actually charges $1, and we don't charge anything. So if two buses show up at the stoplight at the same time, and they're both going to the same place, and one charges $1 and one doesn't charge anything at all, then that means we're stealing riders from another transit service, and we don't want to do that at all. And so we've spread them out to make sure that we're only going there when on times that don't conflict with theirs. So I don't know if that really is the same situation that you're having, because it sounds like it's like just tribal members are living off reservation and only want to use the reservation service, but not the local county service. But that might just be, you know, access, because we have a similar thing, you know, here on the reservation. Even our tribal members who live off reservation, who live in town, we encourage them to utilize the city of Pendleton's taxi ticket service before they access ours. And so we're providing ours to tribal members who live on reservation, and tribal members who live in Pendleton should access the city of Pendleton's, so that we're also, again, not duplicating those services. It has come up a couple times saying, well, you know, I'm a tribal member, I'm entitled to this. I'm like, well, I agree, but, you know, we're just encouraging you that that's actually a better service for within the city of Pendleton, and we're better for out here on the reservation. So if you're going somewhere just within the city of Pendleton, then that's actually a better service for you and cheaper for you than it is for us. So, you know, there's a lot of just one-on-one communication with a lot of our membership.
So, JD, do you have any interaction with TTAP? Have you ever worked with them?
Yes, Rowena, actually, she's in town today. She's here doing a training. And the RTAP from Oregon was in my office about 2 hours ago.
So what do you
we're not much so far. A lot of it, I mean, now that, you know, one of the things we've done in the last couple of months is we've internalized all of our drivers. So we had to purchase service, and so we internalized those drivers. And that's all happened the last 3 or 4 weeks. And so now we're taking over a lot of the training. So now that's what our conversations are with LTAP and TTAP, is to make sure that our drivers are trained and we have access to all those services they provide for training.
So have you signed up with the RTAP LMS, the RTAP e-learning?
I don't know if Janine has or not.
Oh yeah, because we have some driver training modules in there, and some of the stuff that you could put up in your operations center, so that there's to help keep driver training up and to help support the new drivers that you have. Because I think it sounds like you've put on 10 or 11 new drivers.
12 as of a couple hours ago. So we're about 3 short, hopefully still. So we're getting there.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna be a massive utilization of TTAP here shortly, and that's one of the reasons why Rowena, our local TTAP coordinator, she's in town and is trying to set up and make sure that we're first in line on a lot of that stuff. So they're a huge resource, and I'm continually shocked at how much free resources they actually have. Just today, one of our not limitations, but one of the things that we've never really stressed with our drivers is actual customer service. And so that's one of the things we're really focusing on right now is customer service. Because a lot of our drivers, they're out in the community and they actually spend more time with customers than they do with any of their employees or any of their coworkers. So they're the face of the tribe, especially with our transit service. And so we want to make sure that, everything's even and kosher and everyone's getting the same kind of a response and the same kind of assistance from their drivers when they navigate through our system. So yeah, and LTAP said, yeah, we can bring somebody out and do customer service training and driver safety training, and and so anyway, LTAP they brought me a pamphlet, and it's about 108 pages worth of training opportunities through LTAP.
Wow.
And that's just a list of DVDs and video stuff. And then that's just from the library, like library catalog of their training modules. So
cool.
That's an enormous amount of resources out there.
Because I would really also encourage you to check out the RTAP resource library. We have just completed a maintenance training, but one of our most popular trainings is a safety training for drivers and systems. And
okay.
And we have actually interactive quizzes and modules that are put together on the learning management system, and that way you can track who you've trained and who needs to get their training, or when was the last time people had certain trainings.
Right.
When you had people on staff for more than a day, it starts adding up, and trying to keep people trained up. Do you want to go to the next slide?
And so, I think this is probably the most foundational discussion I think that kind of came out of the RTAP was developing kind of a transit organization, National Tribal Transit Organization, because there's very unique things that tribes have to address. I think that's, I guess we wanted to make sure that there was a statement that the tribes are just another feather, one of the feathers in the hat of RTAP, and we want to make sure that the people that are assigned to that one feather are really making sure that we're coming together and making sure that our concerns and our needs and our objectives are being heard. And so, I'm open to any kind of conversations about that. I'm totally for it. I think it's something that can probably be utilized and probably even facilitated through RTAP. I think that's probably the most, excuse me, in my estimation, that's probably the best way to have it facilitated. But again, I'm totally open to having that organized in any way. I see there's a bunch of questions just popped up, or is there? No, I think they're all answered, aren't they?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah. And so if anybody has any comments or discussion about starting a national travel transit organization, I don't know, should they contact you, Robin, to maybe coordinate that? Or maybe even
you
Jennie?
and
I don't
Jennie
know.
probably.
She's offline, so I don't want to.
Yeah, well, we couldn't really be the movers and shakers in starting a tribal transit organization. That would have to be with you and Jennie or other people who are interested. We're happy to host the forum and help people have a place to discuss it. One of the things I was looking at the NTTC agenda from Myrtle Beach, and it was great. But I look at it, and there's one area, that one strand of transit, and there didn't look like there was a whole lot. I mean, maybe 4 sessions for the whole conference that addressed tribal issues, and the 2 main things were alcohol and drug, which is super important, and then another operational issue. And I just thought about how many things that would we have a conference, how many different sessions we have, and all the different issues people are dealing with. And it seems like there could be a more robust curricula for conferences. And
Yeah.
I think having a more of a because the other 4 sessions were all focused on the road for each area, or during each concurrent session grouping. So I think that it's a good conversation, and I would hope that people who are interested, they should contact you and Jennie, and we can create space at the next conference, or set up a conference call for people that want to talk about this. If there's people that want to continue that conversation, they can let us know or let you know, and we can set up the conference call.
Okay. Okay.
What would you?
Yeah.
I guess what would you see as a real benefit of putting together a national tribal organization, national tribal transit organization?
What would I see as a benefit?
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be, because there are some very specific things, especially with the formula funding. In tier 1s, 2, and 3, there's some problems with that. And it's hard to kind of be one little tribe and trying to, argue against that in the winds, And so I think it's, there's a collection of people actually coming together and working on things like that, and at least have a single voice, And there are other organizations too that I think that I've not really been heavily involved with, such as NCAI, and I don't know how transit's operated or transportation things have been kind of handled through NCII. And so there might be some other avenues, not only through RTAP as one direction, but also through the tribal organizations to really make sure that those kind of things are put on the front burner. But I think it also does, even me going to AT&I, which is the Affiliated Tribes and Northwest Indians, there's not a lot of planners that even go there. So, and we're trying to organize kind of a planning group to kind of, we're all kind of get lost in our own little forest. We kind of, we have our own little problems, our own little issues. But, having some kind of outreach, to other organizations that have been doing this for a while, or people who have problems. One of the things we're going over right now is operations manual. Because we had to bring on our drivers in such short notice, we're kind of operations manual by memo. Every day there's something else, some little situation comes up, and so we have to make a determination. We write a memo, and eventually hopefully that turns into an operations manual. But trying to get operations manuals from somebody else, from other tribes, would be a great help. To discuss some of those things. They're very specific to tribes. So I think there's quite a bit of things that are beneficial to it, even if it's an informal group of just peer to peer, kind of like with the RTAP.
No, we're happy. I think one of the things that would be great is if people online, if you have a good operations manual, I'm sure JD would be happy to have a look at it. So we'll be happy to share that. If someone, one of the people on the call now has an operation manual that you've put together that that works for you. It's always great. One of the things about rural and tribal transit is the people that are your peers want you to be successful, and I haven't ever been in a room with a group of rural and tribal transportation people and had them say, oh no, I don't share that.
Right.
Everyone wants to share those things.
Right.
Hey, Robin?
Yeah?
We have a comment here which says that this concept for a national tribal transit organization has been attempted several years ago in Arizona. The organization did not function, and CTAA does have tribal representation on their national board and annual conference.
Okay. Is there any idea of why it didn't function? Because I usually think there's more power in numbers.
It doesn't say.
Okay. All right.
Well, one thing I mean, if it's analogous to planning, there was for APA, American Planning Association, there was a tribal section. So there's like intersections with an APA, and years ago there was a tribal section, and it kind of went defunct, mostly because the national is almost too big and broad for a lot of people trying to balance their budgets day to day. And I think that's kind of where it was, is that, obviously there's some very broad things that we need to address nationally, but enough people didn't have enough time to dedicate to that because they had so much work to do at home at the very local level. And I think that's why that kind of fell apart for APA, and I'm probably going to guess something similar happens with the National Tribal Transit Organization that started in Arizona. I'm just guessing. I'm not familiar with that organization or that effort at all. But even now, trying to get the APA group put back together, it's been an uphill battle. There's people that are all interested in it. They say, go for it, but I don't want to have anything. I'm not going to do anything other than be a signatory on it. They don't have the time or the effort to really put anything more into it. So, it's one of those things that's hard. It's like, it's great, let's get together and all meet, but sometimes for people that are running buses, it's just like another meeting, that they don't have time for.
Right. And if there's any cost, on our
Right.
limited budget,
Yeah.
that's another issue too.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I'm just guessing that's probably, so that's probably some of the limitations on that.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right.
The next element, welcome back, Jenny. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Boy, we're all on generator here, so I don't know what's going on.
Oh, geez. We had a windstorm yesterday, so I'm lucky to have power here as well.
So I think that's what we have. It's, your weather moves over to us.
Yeah. Well, the next element is grant writing and the healthcare rules, and you're more knowledgeable about those. Did you want to talk about those, Jenny?
Grant writing?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't know if I'm more knowledgeable on grant writing. I've never written grants until I became a transit manager, and that was a steep learning curve. I've probably been more successful than I haven't, but I don't know what do you think would people be interested in that? Maybe some. Well, they brought it up as they really liked the short session that we had at the conference, and so people were interested in having more of that availability with some resources listed for their area, and that's the kinds of things they expressed interest in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm writing this down, and so I think one of the things we were talking about is, if we were going to, if this group is interested in working on a tribal transit track for the or sessions for either Asheville or for the next RTAP conference, things that we should make sure are on the session list and find people, because we had Debbie McGlasson was going to do it, and then she had to go get surgery, so she wasn't able. She was not doing well, but she's great now. But to see if we could put together another session, either in Asheville, which is coming up in October of this coming year, or for the next transit conference. And if there were people on this call that are interested in working on that, they should definitely contact us, and we'd like to work with our RTAP board, but also the tribal community to get the sessions that people want to be getting information on.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the comments that kind of came up through the Coordinated Human Services Plan was, I kind of asked everybody in the room how many people started out in transit and how many expected, or that was their goal, was to get into transit, and almost nobody raised their hand, or somehow transit got handed off to them and everybody raised their hand. And, and kind of like what Jennie said is, grant writing is very specific for transit. Just like any I think program, your grants are very, very specific to the funding and the people that you're working with, and there's a lot of them. So there's so many grants. My program, I think we counted 12 grants we're actually operating under, and each one of them requires a written grant every year or 2 years. And so, making sure that we're coordinating that and utilizing our own language. And so, and how do you actually pull that together? So the Coordinated Human Services Plan, our transit plan, those are all languages that they all need to be aligned with each other so that when you do write your grants, that everything just kind of falls into place. Because I've seen grants, I've reviewed grants where their missions and their statements and their objectives are almost completely contrary to what their mission statements are or what their plans are stating. Because nobody really went to check and say, is this actually what we're doing? This is what our mission says we're doing? And, and so we make sure that those are broad enough and wide enough to be able to accommodate grant writing.
Okay.
So, Robin, I didn't know much about the AARP brief in community care organizations. Did you want to touch base on that, or?
Well, I was thinking, I just went to this Livability Solutions Forum up in Burlington, and then also AARP, that AARP sponsored. But one of the things they've done is they have a brief on working with the the Affordable Care Act. So that might be something where if people are interested, we could get AARP to do just a tribal webinar on that brief and talk about and share information that they've gained, or share, get information from the group about how the ACA has worked in tribal communities. Because the new healthcare rules was something that came up as a takeaway that people got from the conference in Denver, but I know AARP is interested in sharing the brief that they put together, and if that was something people were interested in, we could work on doing a webinar for that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, because I know we've been trying to coordinate more with our local clinic, making sure that because they have their own transit provide, or give rights to medical appointments and things like that. We want to make sure we're really well coordinated on those.
Yeah.
And of course, how do you get paid for those? That's always a good one.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
That's like a trick. Yeah. No. I maybe what we could do is get a couple of the people who are working on. Because I know we did do a presentation at the conference from Carrie Banta in Texas, and she was working with the Administration for Community Living and helping move children, and that they were able to work that with their program and with the Administration for Community Living, the HHS, the healthcare people. So that might be a good webinar for us to think about putting together.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in real quick because I know we were talking about the conference a lot. National RTAP will be posting presentations from the conference on our site when I get the time to do all of that. So check your e-news for that announcement when it comes out because that content, or at least a lot of it, will be made available for people who weren't able to attend the conference. And also, please always feel free to email us with webinar suggestions.
Okay.
Okay. So the next, I know this came up quite a bit too, was sharing ideas and strategies on how to retain staff. And I think, this is something that I've been concerned about because we are rural and there's not a lot of people that are qualified as CDL. We're slowly trying to get more and more people qualified to actually drive, but we want to make sure we're actually able to retain the drivers that we have. And even dealing with or talking to our new drivers, some of our drivers have only been with us for 2 weeks now. One of our drivers worked for a delivery service, and he said he loves working for us because he's worked for us for 2 weeks and he hasn't been yelled at or no one has sworn at him yet. And so, so there's little things I think like that we need to try, or that we're looking at on making sure that they're really happy. Our benefits and even our organization is pretty generous. Some of them, yesterday was their first day, and anybody who's on the payroll for this week is getting turkeys for Thanksgiving from the tribe. And so, some of these guys, their first day, they were nervous about coming to a new job, and they found out that they qualified for a free turkey from their organization. They were elated. And so it's little things like that I'm keeping retention, but also keeping them trained and keeping them happy with their jobs. Like I said before, a lot of times they're working out with the public, which can be unforgiving at times. And so how do we actually train them, excuse me, how do we train them to actually deal with difficult situations? And that's one of the things that we're really focusing on coming up in the future is making sure that our drivers are a positive face for the tribe as well as the transit system, as well as being able to diffuse some very difficult situations that we've found ourselves in over the years. So I don't know if there's any other strategies that people have or know about specifically on retaining staff. Or making a place just a better place to work.
Mm-hmm. Transit is a really nice atmosphere. It's a nice work atmosphere. Both, the public, they're usually really happy to see you. Just the whole peer-to-peer on the tribal, but also on any transit is sharing and helping each other out, and it's just a really healthy environment, I think. I've had other work environments that weren't nearly as healthy, and I just really enjoy the positive and just really genuinely nice professional work environment, and I try to, extend that to my staff and to our community as well.
Well, one thing you brought up, Jenny, too, that we've utilized already is that we have a lot of paperwork that the individual drivers have to fill out. Their pre-check, their post-checks, their driver logs. There's a lot of numbers, and they have to finalize them all at the end of the day. And sometimes they already in the first couple of weeks seen people not put a lot of effort into them, especially to fill out the forms specifically. The most boring thing they could do all day is sit down and have to do paperwork at the end of the day, especially after they were driving since 3 in the morning. So, Jenny brought up an idea while we were at RTAP is to actually put out a whole diagram of how those numbers actually tie back up into the reporting for your state and national reporting requirements, and then how that gets translated into a larger policy at the national and local level, and then comes back and turns into money that goes right into their pockets as the driver. And we've done that, and it's also there's like these lights going on. So, these aren't just numbers. We're just not curious about how many people are actually riding it or what our mileage is on our vehicles. Like, this is actually coming back and affecting me personally as an employee, making sure that our numbers are accurate so that we're able to get our full allocations. So that was a huge thing I think that has really helped us.
We could post that. We we could post that as on our web as part of the information from this call. We'd love to do that.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean that's one of the things. When I was talking to the drivers, they're just driving buses and filling out paperwork. They don't see even the administration within our building. I mean, the administration side, they don't even get to the administration side. For transit, I think we counted, like I said, I think 12 grants, and I think we have 8 or 9 different plans that are somehow intersecting with transit, and that's a lot of policy and government and bureaucracy and all that stuff. And we try to simplify it and explain how their piece fits into this big, larger thing, and how that comes back and affects them directly. And that was all their eyes went bright, oh, now I get it.
And, now you have to watch.
It's already improved.
Now you have to watch they don't add extra riders.
Well, right. We have cameras. I think there's a lot of little things like that on making them part of the conversation. Sometimes when the drivers aren't part of the conversation, they just feel like they have a lot of things thrust onto them. They have a lot of expectations. Their pay isn't enormous, and they're the ones that are caught in the middle between the bureaucracy and the customers that are trying to get somewhere. And so as long as you keep them as part of the conversation and part of the decision-making process, I think that's a huge thing for the drivers.
No, that's great information.
Do we want to go on to operations? I don't know how much time we're already at a full hour.
Yeah, well, I think go to the next slide. Oh, yeah, this was the other thing. These were things that people had as takeaways from the conference. And actually, there were 3 tribes that got their information going in Google Transit just at the conference, and so is now available through Google Maps. And if people are interested, we could do a webinar with Marcy to invite other tribal programs if they're interested to get their data up in Google Transit. Webinar. Okay. Yeah, so one of the things, this was part of the discussion around, you want to have your system be available to people, and how do you let people know it exists, and how do you invite people to use your system? Because if people have been doing something else, they don't think, oh, wow, I'd like to change what I'm doing. If what they're doing works, then they tend to do it. So with the idea that we want to make the information about transit available to people when they need it and where they're looking for it, RTAP provides the web builder, which you can create a website, and it has a place where you can put schedules in. You also can participate in the Google Transit or the General Transit Feed Specification, and that goes into Google Maps and is available for people to put together trips between systems. Like JD's system is all on Google Maps, and so if you live in any one of those communities, you can get a trip between those communities on Google Maps, but you also can go to Portland or Boise using the Google Transit or the Google Mapping application. It puts together the rail, the bus, the different services that are in the area. And FTA is looking at, and there are technology people who are looking for ways that we can get the demand response services visible in those applications too, because many of you I know provide demand response services, and no one knows they're there unless they know they're there.
Right.
So we're looking for ways to help make those visible so that when people are using an application like Google Maps, they can get something that says, to complete this leg of your trip, please call this number to reserve your seat. So we've got some things that are coming up in this next year that definitely we want to keep everyone aware of. And so people that haven't got RTAP e-news should sign up for that. So you can go to our website and sign up. And so when things like this start coming up, or ideas, opportunities to voice your interest or your needs, we want to make sure that people know about it.
And for the GTFS, just as a, I mean, I don't know what other state agencies do, but here in Oregon, the Oregon, or ODOT now hosts all of our GTFS data and then make sure it's updated, and so all the services can access it from there. And even though it's GTFS for Google, other services like Bing and Yahoo, and I think there's another transit, specifically for transit site, they all utilize the same data. And so it's not just Google, it's going to a whole bunch of different places. And then also, one point on the web builder, I was talking to Thomas, I believe his name was, from Portland, that gave that presentation on that. That web builder creates mobile-ready websites as well, so people can actually access it on the website, on their phones, and accesses all that Google Transit. There's another one that I would love to see in the future, is actually developing a mobile app. I know there were some people at RTAP that were looking at doing like a rural Uber kind of project, but we are also in the process of developing like a one bus away kind of app with our IT, and hopefully in the next year we'll have that rolled out, so then people can actually access all that Google Transit data directly from their phone, and then they can see if a bus is going to be a minute late or 10 minutes late right from their phone, and it actually will help free up some of our time here on Tier 1 customer support. But then that also requires GPS on all the buses, which we're hopefully trying to get included with. We're hoping to get Wi-Fi on all the buses by the next year and a half as well.
Oh, really?
There's a lot of technology. I'm hoping.
Right.
Well, I mean, some of our riders, they're commuters, and they're on the bus for an hour in the morning. I mean, our longest routes, coming from Tri-Cities, you're on the bus for almost 2 hours. So an hour and a half, that gets boring if you don't have web.
Yeah, no, the thing about rural transit and the information about services is that when you have a 4-hour headway, it's really important to know where your bus is and when the next bus is, because the next one is either 4 or 12 hours away. So you're pretty desperate to know exactly where things are. When I first heard about the real-time information for buses, they were explaining how in New York City they were implementing this, and they know when the next bus was coming, and the headways at that time were like 90 seconds.
Right, yeah.
I thought, who cares?
Well, yeah, when Seattle, because I actually knew the kids up in Seattle that actually developed one bus away for their service up there, and most of the buses in the Seattle area are maybe 10, 15-minute headways. Mm-hmm. And, so I'm like, geez, we need this out here in the rural area where we have 6, 7, or 8-hour headways. Because we have that situation. I mean, we just, there's somebody in a wheelchair that needs to get home, and we have to go take the van out because they were 5 minutes late and they couldn't wait for, 12 hours for the next bus. So we go get the van and take them somewhere. And so that's a lot of cost and effort to us, but obviously we don't want to necessarily lose that customer either, or to leave a customer stranded, especially a person with disabilities.
So I had another thought about a webinar in the Marketing Transit Toolkit, because at the beginning we were talking about doing outreach to like BIA or IHS, or even to the Tribal Council. That one of the things about Marketing Transit Toolkit is it has a brochure that templates for brochures that you can put your own pictures in and your text. But thinking about putting a brochure together to explain what you're doing to the Tribal Council, or to explain it to other agencies, your external funding agencies, not just to your customers that in the community you're trying to invite to use a service, but looking at some of your, putting together a brochure that talks about economic development or funders in your community. So, you could put that in one of your grant applications.
Yeah.
Webinar. Do you want to turn the page?
Okay. I think this is the last slide. Yep.
There we go. So I've been sort of taking notes, and we'll post these after the conference call. And we're at the end of our time, unless there's questions people want to ask. If people would like to, one of the things we'd like to hear from people is, do you want to continue doing the tribal call? We can set this up at any time frame that you want. We can do it monthly or quarterly. We can do it separately from the peer-to-peer calls, so that we have a group of people, and if it's a small group, we can do just a straight conference call. We'd like to hear from people and what they're interested in. We're interested, because we are interested, as JD said, in supporting the tribal transit, and if you want to work at becoming more organized, that's great. Or if having a discussion periodically about the new legislation, which will be out in the next couple of weeks. So we'll have a chance to sort of digest that a little, and we can talk about that. Any thoughts are welcome.
No one's jumping.
Well, so Jenny and JD, would you be willing to reconvene in like a couple months, and we'll see where things are at, and if people are interested in working with us on the conference that's coming up, we'll be working on the RFP for that, and I'm interested in working with or coordinating with the TTAP programs and LTAP programs to get the technical assistance on the ground for our next conference and start putting that together.
And if anyone has any topics that they'd like discussed on the peer-to-peer call, they can always email JD or myself directly. So, or they can give us a call.
Yep.
We can certainly,
I just put our contact information up, slide up, so everyone can make sure.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, so if there's something that you would like to discuss and maybe weren't comfortable speaking on the conference call, we'd like or if you'd like to have a topic that you'd like to put out to the peer-to-peer group to see for ideas, we just email JD or myself, and we would be happy to do that for you.
Yay. Well, I just really want to thank both of you for coming and spending the time doing this and sort of continuing the conversation. I think that there's just a lot of practical things, and I think that if we can work at sharing some more of our knowledge and our good works with each other, that'll help all of us. So I hope that we get some information about sort of desk books for operational manuals so that JD can get his program going again, or for the first time. And any ideas that people have or interest in areas around any of the topics we've talked about, just let us know, and we'll be happy to bring in people to talk about that, do a webinar, or just reconvene in a couple months and see what is on people's minds.
Okay.
Thank you.
There were a couple comments that came in just now from Franklin. New mandates from the final funding bill would be very beneficial to tribal entities. And Susie Racehorse and Shoshonebannock, I would like training on the Google Map for my dispatchers.
Okay.
So those are two things we make sure they're on there.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Okay. GTFS, and legislation, yeah. So as we get the information from what's going on in Congress, we'll connect. Maybe we'll be able to get CTAA or one of the more advocacy-oriented organizations that I know is parsing language word by word to just talk a little bit about what happened or what's happening with the new bill. And we'll get in contact with Susie Racehorse about GTFS and helping her program get comfortable with Google Maps.
All right.
Good.
Super. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys, everyone.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.